So today we're presenting 3 original research projects about lesbians. Research about lesbians is vital not only for ourselves, but also for the implications they have on other groups. And the benefit of an event like FiLiA, as you may know, is that it means that we can engage with problems from a specifically feminist lens. And we can learn and connect with one another, working together towards meaningful social change for women and girls. Whether it's your first FiLiA, like it is for me, or your 10th, together we can come together and strengthen our understanding of lesbian voices, views, and lives. So before we start, we just want to highlight another research project about lesbians by Women Is This, or WIT. They recently did a survey that explores broadly the concept of gender identity ideology, but they also had a section in it about lesbian erasure, and they've recently released a report. You may see some flyers about that around. And they've prepared a statement today about that. So I'm going to pass it over to Sue. Do you want to do it on camera?
So I'm reading this statement on behalf of Women Is This. Women Is This is a collective of mainly lesbian and bisexual women with backgrounds in campaigning, social research and the charitable sector. The collective carried out an international survey about the impact of gender identity on women's psychological well-being. The survey had approximately 3,000 responses from women living in 57 countries. Over half were from the UK. 2 of the members wrote this report, which specifically focuses on the views and experiences of over 500 lesbians who responded. I'm sure some of you here today contributed. Another member published the full data set from the WIT survey online for everyone to read and use. The links are there. Please do, as this is an enormous amount of valuable material. The authors would love to be here presenting their research findings today, and we would love to have had them as part of our panel. However, they both have concerns about the impact this might have on their other work and potential employment. Sadly, this is indicative of the findings from their report, and as we have seen countless times, where women are silenced through fear of repercussions. You'll find leaflets around with a QR code and web link for the report. Please read it, talk about it, share widely, and use as evidence. And that's the statement from the WIT Collective. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you so much for coming. We hope you enjoy this panel. And now that we've done the opening stuff, we'll start with me.
Can I do something? You may pass it that down there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so as you now know, my name is Ava. I am a researcher and PhD candidate from Western Australia, and I have a long history of lesbian, feminist and feminist activism. Today I will be talking about lesbians and the concept of safe space, just talking about my research project so far. But first, I just want to do a custom that is happens in Australia, which is called an acknowledgement of country. And I do this because I want to recognise the context in which my research project took place. So although it's very different to being in the UK, I just want to take the space for that reason. So I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of Wajak Noongar Boodja, where I live and work, and the countries throughout Australia where I and the participants engaged in the research process. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians' enduring connections to land, water, cultures and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. The land was stolen and never ceded. Thank you so much. Okay. So just a quick overview of what I'll be presenting today. I'm going to talk a bit about what my study is about, and then a bit about the method, so how I'm conducting the study. Then the majority of the content will be about the results so far from that project, and then I'll present some provisional theories that I've generated from that information, and then I'll conclude with a summary of the main points from my presentation. So this project is an ongoing one and is a part of my PhD. It examines the concept of safe space in connection with lesbians as a marginalised group. So by exploring the limitations and possible benefits of spaces deemed safe for lesbians, we can provide needed insight for public policy, organisational practice and feminist politics. The aims of my project include to develop a praxis of safe space using collaborative research methods to build pathways for meaningful social change. And this is because the concept of safe space is quite confused and not really adequately enacted particularly for lesbians. Also to provide insight into lesbian experiences, particularly those of marginalisation, to discern the causes and consequences of lesbian spaces, including whether such spaces can effectively address lesbian marginalisation and support lesbian contributions and engagement with broader civil society. And lastly, to examine whether specific boundary tactics like lesbian-only space can cultivate what's called a post-oppositional consciousness or solidarity and relationality, both within the lesbian community and between lesbians and other communities. And I'll talk a bit about post-oppositional consciousness later in the slides. So my methods for this project were collaborative mixed methodology, which basically involves a combination of research types to strengthen the quality of information. So it also means it's very flexible. So different types of research means that people can participate in ways that are more suitable to their needs. So some people can't do a 2-hour-long qualitative interview, but some people can fill out a survey. So that's another benefit of that kind of thing. One of these methods I use is called Feminist Participatory Action Research, or FPAR. And this type of research places lesbian priorities at the forefront. So it's not so much about what I want or what I'm interested in, it's more about what the majority of lesbians who take part are interested in. And the advantages of this kind of research is that it specifically aims to examine women's knowledge and experiences and conditions. It seeks mutual understanding and enhances the potential for change by altering the power relations between the researcher and participants, aiming for as non-hierarchical as possible. So in my research, I use this method through a series of group interview workshops. And in them, we examine lesbian priorities, share experiences, and co-develop the parts of the project together. So, for example, in the collaborative interview workshops, we sit in a circle and we each take the time to reflect on questions and talk about what's important to us. And as I move on to other stages of the project, like the one-on-one interviews and the survey, we develop the questions together. So again, it's less about what I'm interested in and more about what the collective of lesbian women are interested in. And some of the results of that I'm going to talk to you about today. But first, I want to briefly talk about my framework that I'm using. It's called post-oppositional consciousness, and I'm using it as a theory and a method. And as a theory, it recognises that all humans are inextricably linked with one another, with shared commonalities. And as part of that, it embraces difference as a necessary way of relating to one another. So less about the idea of sameness and we're all the same, and that lesbians are all the same. It's more about, well, what are the differences between lesbians as well? And as a part of this, it allows people to move away from the high individualism of Western capitalist heteropatriarchy. And then as a method, it emphasises relationality. So that is experiencing the self as a part of others and vice versa. And so I encourage within myself, but also within participants, flexibility, dialogue, and particularly friendly disagreement. Space is given for complexity and contradictions within people. It also requires openness, vulnerability, trust, effort, a lot of time, and deeply listening to one another's experiences and perspectives. And I chose this method because the notion of lesbian space is quite contentious today, And our politics is increasingly polarised and oppositional. Black and white thinking thrives, and there's a lack of nuance and willingness to engage in good faith with one another. Okay, so now that I've talked about all the structure of everything, let's get into the results, which is the interesting part. The majority of participants, a part of my project, preferred the term lesbian to describe their sexuality. However, the definition of lesbian differed. The most common definition was these three. So, female homosexual, or an exclusively same-sex attracted woman, a woman who exclusively loves and or is attracted to women, or a non-man exclusively attracted to and or loving non-men. And the interesting thing is, when I went back to my group interview workshop, Lesbians, they wondered if there was an age component to the final definition, and there isn't, unfortunately. It is kind of, in Australia anyway, it spans all types of ages. This also, notably, almost a quarter of participants said that prior to knowing their sexuality, they felt a sense of difference in childhood but didn't know what that was. And all of this information tells me that not only is heterosexuality considered default in society, but so is man. Almost a quarter of participants were under the age of 25, so this is still affecting lesbians growing up today. There remains little to counter the narratives of the heterosexual man as norm. Okay. So a big part of my project is understanding what we mean by safe and unsafe, particularly in the context of a safe space. More than half of the participants believe that safety is important and necessary. Some believed it to be complex, with both beneficial and challenging aspects. And the latter can relate to oppositional and bad faith politics, in which the notion of safety can be used to harm or silence others. And I'm sure everyone in the room has some kind of experience with that. Conversely, some argued that safety doesn't exist for lesbians or for women at all, so it's an irrelevant concept. But what is safety? Participants defined it as acceptance, as respecting difference, similarly a lack of judgment, a lack of physical and verbal attacks, feeling relaxed and at ease, and the ability to be open and vulnerable, as well as lesbian and ethnic cultural safety. And that can refer to things like being around people like themselves, being able to practice and talk about their lesbian or ethnic culture and experiences without judgment or pushback, being able to flirt with other people without it being perceived as wrong, and being able to talk about things like my girlfriend or my wife and that being accepted. Participants also explored what lack of safety meant, and all of these were based on experiences that they actually had rather than those they witnessed. And these were male-dominated spaces because they're loud, the men in them are dominating, and they're uncomfortable to be in specifically as lesbians. It also included male violence, including abuse, sexual violence, and gay bashings. It also included sexual pressure and or harassment, and lastly, intimidation, including threats, verbal abuse, and using one's physical presence to intimidate. So from all of this information, I argue that safety has not only a sex-based component, but also a homosexual or specifically lesbian component as well. For this project, I wanted to understand what community means to lesbians, and this was so I could better understand what kind of lesbian space, what kind of spaces that lesbians want, and how effectively we go about creating and managing them in ways that are meaningful and sustainable. So community was commonly defined as a mixture of social events or gatherings, whether in person or online, and then the most common definition of a specifically lesbian community was those without men and those which bring women, or more specifically, lesbians together. The most common experiences of lesbian spaces were small to medium-sized gatherings, online groups and spaces, and activism and politics. Lastly, visibility, acceptance, and respect for lesbian boundaries were repeatedly expressed as gaps in communities. And this could be the general community, the LGBT plus community, or even the lesbian community. So out of 37 responses, almost half of the participants said that lesbian community was non-existent or hard to find. The remaining majority said it was accessible, but underground, hidden, or sparse. Having access to lesbian spaces is important. Participants expressed considerable value in lesbian spaces, with the most common reasons being acceptance, safety, belonging, and sharing stories, history, and culture. So with that in mind, I briefly want to explore some of the common difficult experiences that participants shared for their sexuality. And again, these are ones that they personally experienced rather than those that they witnessed. So these are the external pressure to conform to heterosexual society, the general association of lesbian being a bad thing, a dirty word, or something you shouldn't be, society obscuring, silencing and invisibilising lesbianism, so participants didn't know what it was or that it was something that they could be, a lack of acceptance from family and friends, and the external pressure to include men in their sexual life. So these top 5 responses were prominent in those aged 18 to 25, suggesting there's still issues needing to be addressed today. And when I asked how they navigate such difficult experiences, the most common response was connection with lesbians or the lesbian community. This highlights the value and necessity for lesbian spaces. But with how contentious lesbian spaces are today, how do we know what kind of spaces lesbians actually want? So the types of spaces participants expressed interest in were specific, mixed, and both depending on the circumstances. So in this context, specific means lesbian-specific or lesbian-only. And in addition to the previous slides, the benefit of such spaces were to address their issues as lesbians, to challenge the invisibilising of lesbians, and to challenge the minimising of their voices, which occurs in mixed spaces. And so mixed in this context refers to those which include female homosexuals, and trans and gender diverse individuals, whether they're male or female. Those in favour of such spaces defined it as a space of solidarity with one another, where people don't ask about body parts. And lastly, both depending on the circumstances refers to participants who wanted lesbian-specific spaces for some issues and then mixed spaces for other issues. So they perceived a benefit in having both. And in this category, mixed could refer to lesbians and gay men working on something together, or lesbians and bisexual women working on something together, or the broader LGBT plus community. So now that I've presented all of the results from my research so far, I want to talk about some of the provisional theories that I've generated. So firstly, the notion of safe space is gendered, informed by one's sex and culture, but also one's sexuality. 2, the degree to which a person is marginalised by society affects their desire for a safe space. 3, there is a benefit to in-group specific spaces for marginalised people that cannot be replicated to the same degree in mixed spaces. And lastly, lesbians want, and thus should have, both specific and mixed spaces. So, in conclusion, I argue that the definition of, the concept of safe space is complex and not always beneficially experienced. Looking at this concept from the perspective of the marginalised, and in this case lesbians, can provide useful insights in improving practice. The definition of lesbian is contested, informed by heterosexuality and maleness being the default and norm in society. The notions of safety and lack thereof are informed by one's sex, sexuality and culture. And lesbians find their communities and spaces hard to access. However, such spaces are also valuable and needed for social, psychological and safety reasons. The majority of lesbians who participated wanted lesbian-specific spaces, with some also wanting mixed spaces as well. And lastly, if you're interested in doing any kind of research, consider collaborative or mixed methods. Thank you so much for listening to my talk on lesbians and the concept of safe space. I'm going to pass it over to Jenny now.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm here to talk today about the lesbian survey that we did earlier in the year, and apologies, I do need to use notes, unfortunately, as all the people who I've called by the wrong name already today will testify. Really sorry about that. Okay, so why did we do the survey? Well, research into lesbian lives is diminishing. The vast majority of research that's done at the moment is into LGBTQ+, and it's absolutely impossible to disaggregate lesbians from that data. And it's also compromised by inclusive definitions of the word lesbian. In those situations, it's impossible to disaggregate the men. And there's a recent flurry of peer-reviewed papers written from the perspective that the word lesbian should be inclusive. So it's really difficult to find good quality, actual lesbian research. I will mention some later on, and of course we've already heard about the Women Is This research. There's also the YouGov survey that was done in 2023, and anyone who's been on social media expressing opinions about lesbians being same-sex attracted women and wanting single-sex spaces will have been told that only 4% of lesbians agree with them, based on that survey, which is a real misrepresentation of what YouGov asked and what they found. It didn't ask, do you want, as a lesbian, to have single-sex spaces? It asked you to make a value judgment. How positively or negatively do you view trans people as a lesbian? The other issue with it is that it only aimed its survey at cisgender lesbians, which means that many lesbians, including quite a lot here, including me, would have excluded ourselves from even completing that survey because we're not cisgender, we're just lesbians. We also wanted to follow up on our previous research, which was launched at FiLiA in Glasgow 2 years ago. And that is part of a body of alternative lesbian research, which is being conducted mainly outside academia. So, Women Is This Collective, Sex Matters, LGB Alliance, Lesbian Project. There are a few organisations, but generally, not exclusively, but generally outside academia. And of course, involvement in the For Women Scotland case. At the time we launched this survey, we didn't know the outcome of that. And we wanted evidence to inform our future campaigning, regardless of what the outcome was. And of course, we wanted to know what lesbians think. So, the survey was designed to be quick to complete, but if women wanted to give more in-depth answers, there was the opportunity for them to do so. And many women were incredibly generous with their time, which was absolutely brilliant. We've actually got about 43,000 words of text to look at, which is way too much to even do a qualitative study on, but we are going to do some follow-up analysis of it. And it was based around two main questions. issues affecting lesbians and priorities for campaigning. The issues and the priorities were based on the outcome, the findings of our previous research from 2 years ago. And women were asked to select as many campaign priorities as they liked from a list. And they were also asked for the issues to say whether they thought they affected lesbians, not at all, to some extent, or to a great extent. There was also a space to put the top campaign priority, which could be one of ours or something completely different. And we did all our recruitment via our public Twitter and Facebook profiles. We also asked our private Scottish lesbians groups, and we contacted women through lesbian networks. And this included networks in other countries, for example, Let's Reloaded in Germany. And recruitment ran from January to May this year. Now, the survey was open to lesbians, which we defined as same-sex attracted women. 4 responses ended up being excluded because when they were asked, are you a lesbian, they ticked no. I mean, really. So we ended up with 792 responses in total, of which 692 were included in the final analysis. So exactly 100 responses were excluded, including the 4 who, we put the survey out publicly, so we knew it would attract responses that were abusive, that were off topic, and they're the ones that we've excluded. Having said that, we took a conservative approach to exclusions. If we were in any doubt at all, we left the response in. And so the data that we have includes a range of opinions, but not those who think men can be lesbians or that abuse is okay. I mean, one person decided to call us rectum tokes. I have no idea what a rectum toke is. And apparently history will remember our hatred. So, we collected 2 pieces of demographic information, age and country of residence. So this is the country pie chart. More than half the responses were from the UK. We didn't restrict responses to particular countries. Most of them came from Anglophone countries. We did have a few in German and a few in Japanese, which presented a challenge, but they've all been translated and included in the final analysis. And although we did have a good spread of countries, we can't make any claims about this being a global survey, because most of the responses, not all, but most, came from countries where it's safe and legal to be lesbian. And the age, again, we got a good spread of ages. There's a little bit of missing data. Some women decided to give us answers when we asked for their age, like mature or older than you. So we don't quite have 692 responses, but they did make us chuckle. And the youngest participant put an age down as 14. We have absolutely no way of verifying whether that young woman was 14 or not. We just have to take it on face value. And the oldest was 87.
Nice.
And in total, 14 put their age down as under 21, which we were really pleased about. So, the issues affecting lesbians. This is just the first 5 of them. There were 10 altogether. So, like I say, we've got the 3 columns there, not at all, to some extent, to a great extent. I hope that wasn't me. So the first one is feeling unable to come out as a lesbian.
Hello.
I thought that was just the power cable. Right, I will not stand on the cable. I didn't realise it was booby trap. Okay, so the middle one is misuse of the word lesbian. Fourth one is loss of lesbian spaces. And the last one on there is a lack of lesbian representation or role models in the media. If anyone wants these charts, they are in the final report, which is even now available to download from our website. And this is the second set. So the first one there is isolation, not knowing other lesbians in real life. Then porn culture, pressure to have relationships with men, inclusion of men in lesbian spaces, and the last one is organisations being captured by gender ideology. And I'm sure that you all spotted that some of these, to a great extent, bars are huge. 3 of the issues were reported to be affecting lesbians to a great extent by more than 80% of participants. So loss of lesbian spaces, that came in at 85%, just over 85%, and inclusion of men in lesbian groups and spaces was 82%. And these 2 issues were mentioned extensively in the free text comments. Many women lamented the loss of lesbian community, including not being able to find each other, not being able to have open conversations, not being able to organise. There was a lot of concern as well that lesbians have become divided and our community diminished by differences of opinion on gender issues. And that concern came from women on both sides of what you might call the gender divide. And it's actually really difficult to see how this division can be resolved anytime soon, because it's about the fundamental definition of lesbian. Does it include men or does it not?
No.
And likewise, lesbian community. Is it lesbian? Is it LGBTQ+?
No.
There is no halfway house with any of these. There is no compromise position to be found. And some of those responses on the kind of LGBTQ+ side of the debate are opposed, or I should say, expressed opposition to any lesbian-only spaces, even for lesbians who want them. And we also had organisations being captured by gender ideology. That came in at 83.5%. LGBT organisations were particularly highlighted because they're so pervasive, not just Stonewall and in Scotland the Equality Network, but also staff organisations, pride networks. They have huge influence over policy. One respondent did suggest that we campaign to get Stonewall to apologise to lesbians, which
Agreed.
worth a try.
Yeah. Nice one. Quite right.
And this is just a couple of quotes from respondents. They're kind of typical of what women said to us.
Did you read them?
Yes, the top one is, sadly there are no lesbian-only spaces, clubs and bars now. Everything seems to be aimed at or catering for the wider LGBTQI, etc. groups, and I do not feel safe or welcome as a lesbian in these now predominantly male-dominated areas. Yeah. And the second one, I'm still devastated every day that young lesbians miss out on the great lesbian life I had.
Yeah.
Again, the report has a lot of quotes from women. We did ask women to give permission for us to use quotes in the report and in social media if necessary, and the vast majority, including the sweary ones, said yes. So this is the campaign priorities for lesbians. All of them hit at least 60%, so a majority. The top one is improved political representation. The next one is provision of single-sex spaces. That was the top result. Better treatment of all women. Better cultural representation of lesbians. Improved data collection and research. Support for younger lesbians. That's the second most supported. Anti-pornography activism. Ending gender ideology. That was the third most supported. And support for desisters and detransitioners. Now, I've already talked about single-sex spaces and promotion of gender ideology. Support for younger lesbians was supported by lesbians of all ages, and many women, as you've just seen, made further comments regarding the current plight of young lesbians, including the need for intergenerational support and role models. And we also asked women to free type their own top priority, and this brought all sorts of other suggestions, including some unrepeatable ones. But the ones that were particularly highlighted were the needs of older lesbians, misuse of the word lesbian by other women, mostly bisexual and heterosexual women, and issues of safety and legality. So the recommendations that we've made in this report are basically, firstly, follow the law. The results that we've got clearly support the definition of sex as based on biology, as per the outcome of the Supreme Court, and women would quite like that to be sorted out in schools, colleges and workplaces. There has been concerted opposition from LGBTQ+ organisations to both the Supreme Court ruling and the EHRC guidance. But our results show that lesbians, which are after all the L at the front of that LGBTQ+, really want the single-sex spaces, thanks. We'd also like better resources. We would like those single-sex spaces back, the ones that we've lost. We'd like better access to funding as well. At the moment, certainly in Scotland, all the funding is thrown at LGBTQ+ services. Nothing is available for lesbians. In fact, one member of Scottish Lesbians tried to get her walking group included on the Leap Scotland sports listing and was told it wasn't inclusive enough. And we also think that there needs to be some targeted research into the specific needs of younger and older lesbians. And I just want to finish, because I can see I've had the timer, with a quote from a young woman who picked up our research project at FiLiA in Glasgow. And what she said was, "Thank you for doing this research. I picked up a booklet on the results from your 2023 survey at FiLiA, and it made me feel so many things. Upset, anger, but also a sense of sisterhood. It is incredible knowing I am not alone in this." Which kind of made us cry a bit, to be honest, when we read it. So we want to say a huge thank you to all the lesbians who've participated in this research. I know that there are some here who've done it. And the research report is now available if you would like to download it. And if anybody sees that wretched YouGov survey doing the rounds saying lesbians don't want single-sex spaces, please feel free to throw some of our numbers at them. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm Sue Regan, and I wasn't going to wear my hat, but I've taken it off, and I've realised my hair looks terrible because I don't. Excuse me for leaving it on. I wouldn't normally wear a hat indoors. I'm quite old-fashioned, so I'll be using paper notes. My name is, it is technically Dr. Sue Regan, but I don't need to worry too much about that. So I am an honorary fellow at Durham University, and that is just a posh way of saying they don't pay me to do the research that I do, which is fine because I'm retired. And I wanted to do this piece of research very much, so I applied for an honorary fellowship, which they granted me a while ago. And what I'm going to talk about today is a section of it, but I'll put it in the main framework. We've covered the big stuff. So my research, what I'm going to talk about today is a comparison of the youngest group of women that answered my questionnaire and the oldest group of women. So this is just a segment of the overall research, it's not the whole thing. The whole project is called Sex, Gender and Lesbians, Contemporary Debates in Contested Communities, and I started doing it a few years ago because I thought it was really important that we collect this information for all sorts of reasons as part of a historical record. It does have some similarities with both Ava and Jenny's work, which is brilliant, but I wanted to focus on what has it been like for lesbians in recent years in terms of the way that things have changed and affected our communities. So the main collection of data is through a questionnaire. It was online for 4 months. It sounds horrendous to say I had 117 questions, but I managed to disguise it. So if you filled out the survey, you might remember that the numbering went up to question 30. So that seemed okay, but of course some of the questions had quite a lot of sub-questions, and that's how I sneaked in loads of questions. My ethics committee would not have been happy if I'd said there were over 100 questions. A lot of them were tick boxes. So there were scales, or there were just things you could tick, so you could work through them very quickly. And some of them did give you the opportunity to write in answers, and people made the most of that. I have to say, lesbians like to write an essay. So I love your numbers about how many words you had, but I can't even count mine, because there are thousands and thousands. It did take, if you did the tick boxes, it only took you like up to 20 minutes, but if you wanted to spend more time, obviously that's an endless sort of thing, and some people did spend as much as 2 hours on it. Are you okay? Closer? Am I not loud enough? I am now. Okay, I can do that. No, that's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so because it was an online questionnaire, we can talk about some of the pitfalls of that in a minute if we want to. We could talk about methodology a lot, but we don't want to. We know that's not what most people are interested in. They're interested in what we found. Anyway, over 4,500 people looked at my questionnaire. Because it's online, you can check these things. So that's quite a lot. So quite a lot of people looked at it. Obviously, I put something at the beginning that put some of them off, because only 760 odd people actually got through the whole questionnaire to the end. Quite a lot more started it, but they didn't all finish it. So at the beginning, because some of the issues that both Ava and Jenny have touched on are, if you're trying to survey lesbians, how do you make sure that only lesbians are answering your questionnaire? And I take the same view about who is a lesbian as Ava and Jenny, and possibly some people in this room, which is that you have to be female and you have to be same-sex attracted. And so I ended up excluding some people because they were either not female or they were not lesbian, and that took a bit of work. But also I had permission, ethical permission from my university to do a UK-based survey. So I've had to take out over 50 people, women who are lesbians, who live in other parts of the world. And I made a commitment to a couple of them that I spoke to in the early stages that I would do a report on that anyway in my own time. That's fine, I will do that. But so what I'm talking about today is the UK sample, which is 704. That means 704 lesbians who completed it. That is a lot of data, as you can imagine. This is the age breakdown of the total survey. So you can see there are big sections of 60s and 50s, but there are substantial sections in other age groups, and I'm not doing all of that today. So I called it Ask 100 Lesbians. I have 100 lesbians who are my youngest group, so they are aged between 20 and 40. Okay, I recognise any lesbians here in the under 40 or under age group here now today. Anybody here who's under 40? Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. It's great to see you. I know that you will be thinking, that is a massive age group. There is a huge difference between a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old. Yeah. But I tell you, the older lesbians are going to say the same thing, because my older group are 70 and over. And my oldest person who answered the questionnaire, lesbian, was 92. And there's a world of difference between being 70 and being 92. So it cuts both ways, okay? The reason I did it like this is just to have 100 of each group. It's very simple, it's not complicated. I just thought it'd be nice to have 100 of each group. I do recognise there's massive differences in life experiences and attitudes between those. The three areas that I'm covering, and I want to talk a bit about words. We've already touched on it in terms of how you work out who's lesbian and what you think about how different people describe that differently. So I've broken, the survey itself and the results come under three sort of groups of headings. So one bit is about identity. This is one of those words that in sociology, which is where my department is, means a very particular thing, a very particular theoretical idea about identity. Many of my respondents, i.e. the people who answered the questionnaire, the women, don't like the word identity. And they made that very clear. And I understand it. In a public world, it can sound, and more recently as well, it's taken on a bit of an added dimension. So I would say this is about how we describe ourselves, okay? Whether you identify as a lesbian or you think you are a lesbian and you reject the word identity, it is about how we describe ourselves. The second part is about community, also highly contested term. Lots of people think lesbian community doesn't exist. I use the term lesbian communities in my research because I think there are many different groups of lesbians that count as communities, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't, and they're quite separate, and I think that's fine. But my survey is about what we think lesbian community is or isn't for us, for each of us. And then the third sort of part is about the views that lesbians have about what's happened in terms of recent changes, particularly about gender identity and how that's had an impact on lesbians and lesbian community, and about women's experiences and impacts of that. So those are the sort of three areas. Okay, I'm going to try and move through. So, one of my questions, I asked a number of questions at the beginning. You often get the sort of what we call the demographic questions, so who are you and how old are you and that, at the end of the questionnaire. I put them at the front because I wanted to establish things like, are you a woman? A couple of people ticked other. Nobody ticked, well, the people who ticked no got checked out, so we don't count them. So in the 704, there are a couple of people who ticked other, so I then have to go through all the other information they've provided to find out if they are actually women. So that's quite complicated. I asked people, if you're a woman, what's the basis of you saying you're a woman? And I gave a number of options, and people could put their own answer in as well. I asked, do you use a sex-based term about yourself? What is your sex was the actual question, and the options were female, male, something else, or don't want to answer. And some people put something else. So anyway, I also asked this question: do you think of yourself as having a gender identity? And some of the responses I got in the open questions after this related directly to this. People really like the way this question is phrased. And when I presented these results to my department, who are a very mixed group of people, I can tell you, I know there are a couple here at the conference, I know there are some who would not go near this conference, even though they call themselves feminists. So, but they like this question, they like the way it's phrased, because it gives people the option to opt out. So the findings were the younger group, so 76% of them, that's 3/4, said they do not have a gender identity. Okay? Amongst older lesbians, slightly over half do not have a gender identity. So maybe that's not what you would expect to see. You might think these results would have gone the other way. And remember, these are women 70 and over. So slightly, a number of them, a third of them said yes, they have a gender identity. But what do women say their gender identity is, lesbians? Nearly all of them say either female or woman. Now, to me, those are not gender identities. They're either your sex-based term or your social designation in our world. But that's how people have mostly answered questions. There were a random assortment of other things, but anyway, I'll talk about the detail. So in terms of, did you answer yes to being a woman? If you did, what did you say? So I just want to look at this issue of how we understand words by looking at the word female. So people talk about being biologically female or born female and raised as a girl. So there was quite uniformity about that in terms of that being the basis of calling themselves a woman. You ask people what their sex is, nearly everybody said female. So that also ties in with them saying that they are women. And then if you ask people what their gender identity is, if they say they've got one, in this survey, 39% of the younger cohort used the word female as their gender identity, and 73% of the older cohort. So if you want to think about how am I going to ask questions in a survey to establish that I have only females who are women and lesbians, it's worth bearing in mind that people have lots of different ideas about what these words mean, and not all of them are younger women, some of them are older women. So we have to look at that. I also had some quotes from women. Do people want me to read these out? Do you want me to read them out? Yeah. Okay, so a 36-year-old said, "My sex is female, but I identify as non-binary." A 27-year-old said, "Cisgender female, my internal sense of being female aligns with my sex assigned at birth." A 30-year-old said, "I say I'm a female homosexual. It gives me more freedom because it describes the nature of my orientation as it is. A female who is only sexually attracted to other females." She was 30. And then in the older category, "I don't worry too much about these issues. I know I am an adult female. That's enough." A 70-year-old, "A lesbian is a same-sex attracted female, so cannot be a man, i.e. cannot be from the male sex." And my last one is an 80-year-old who said, "My gender identity is female." So there you go. So, mixture of answers and things. Okay, and then thinking about the word lesbian, I've got a 38-year-old. Now, the little bit at the bottom where she describes herself, this was there was a section where I asked people if they call themselves lesbian, and I said, you might use other words, and I'll ask you about that further on in the survey. So the question further on in the survey was the option to tick from a scale of always, mostly, sometimes, rarely, never, or don't want to answer, words like, do you call yourself lesbian? Do you call yourself gay? Do you call yourself homosexual? Do you call yourself dyke? Do you call yourself a woman-loving woman? Do you call yourself same-sex attracted? So the little bit at the bottom of each of these quotes is how they answered that question. So this woman always calls herself queer, mostly pansexual, so that was in the other category, and sometimes lesbian. And she said to me, the term lesbian is an umbrella term for any woman-loving woman and for anyone that feels that the word represents their identity. Now that is a very broad category that could include anybody. And in contrast, here's a 27-year-old who always calls herself lesbian, mostly uses the term gay, and mostly uses the term dyke. 27 years old, she said, I would like lesbian to be clarified as a term that means a female registered at birth, exclusively attracted to females, also registered at birth. So 2 contrasting views from the younger cohort. And here's the one from the older cohort. So this is a 70-year-old who always calls herself lesbian, always calls herself a dyke, which is the word I particularly like, and always calls herself same-sex attracted. And she made 3 slightly different points, which is why I've chosen this. Oh my God. At the beginning. Anyway, you can read that later. I'll skip on. Sex is biological and cannot change. Gender can be chosen, sex cannot. Sexuality is about sex-based attraction to others. A lesbian is same-sex attracted female, so cannot be a man, i.e. cannot be from the male sex. I do not identify as a lesbian, I am a lesbian. So that was a 7. I'm going to have to move really fast because I am early through the beginning. Anyway, do you feel you're part of a lesbian community? The purple columns are the older group, the green columns are the younger group. So as you can see, more older women identify or feel that they are part of a lesbian community. We've got an interesting group of 10 younger women who say they've recently become used to it, feel part of it, and equally a group of 17 younger women who don't feel that they're part of the lesbian community, and nearly even numbers who used to be part of the lesbian community, and there's some really interesting data. I have masses of data, I'm telling you, I have thousands of things. So what do you think of as being part of your community? These were things that I identified and used in the survey. So I asked people about their relationships in terms of personal, intimate relationships like girlfriends or wives, partners, also friends, both online and offline. I asked about groups, informal groups, which might just be social circles and stuff, but I also asked about organised groups. I asked about lesbian events, so things that take place like festivals and party nights and stuff. I asked about places, so bars, clubs, cafes, some of you might remember those. And I asked about politics and campaigns, both online and offline, and I gave them another category, so people tick different things. So talking about and thinking about all those, there are lots of questions and lots of answers. I've got these 3 quotes from younger women. These all happen to be in their 30s. So I thought this was sad, and it highlights for me that one of the biggest things that came through across the whole survey was how emotional this has been. Mm-hmm. How emotional, in many different ways, very hurtful, great sense of loss, much sadness from younger as well as older women about the loss of spaces. So whether you've experienced them, luckily, maybe as an older woman, but maybe as a younger woman, or whether you haven't and you've just heard about it, great sense of loss. So huge emotions, lots of anger about how they've been taken over by people who say they're lesbian, or people who are lesbian, who are letting people who say they're lesbian be part of the community and not allowing lesbians to meet separately. So there's anger and resistance to that, but there's also a great deal of joy in lesbian community. But these 3 quotes I thought were, they kind of summarise things. I mean, there's a range of views, but they do summarise. So the top one says, it feels like a secret I keep to myself that I think being lesbian is about being female and attracted to the same sex, and that we deserve our own spaces. The one in green says, it is no longer okay to be a lesbian amongst lesbians. I am currently homeless when it comes to community. It's heartbreaking. I feel utterly lost and disconnected. And then the blue one at the side, it makes it really hard being lesbian because nothing is for you. Yeah. Really distressing. So now a couple of quotes from older lesbians. The 70-year-old in purple, I remember a time when there was a vibrant, supportive lesbian community. Those days are gone, sadly. I miss them terribly. And then a 77-year-old in green, I am an older lesbian closeted with my partner for much of our younger lives. It was very liberating to come out and join with other lesbians. Now it feels like our identity is being questioned and diluted by all the trans and non-binary issues. I am not essentially a judgmental person, but I am being judged for wanting to protect my hard-won identity. I know you're going to say stop it. I've got 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to pick the slide. There is a whole thing about hopefulness about lesbian community. And the sort of similar, but the older lesbians are more ambivalent about that. Reasons to be cheerful. So these are just some quotes to finish on. 73-year-old, I think it's just fine to want a group to be lesbian only. Yay. Another 70-year-old, I feel that things are gradually improving, but many events are still private and secret. We need more political support to make it clear that single-sex events are legal. You might have seen some of the leaflets on the table. That might help with that. A 71-year-old, I am a both-and person. That reflects some of your stuff about, some people talked about, yeah, it's fine to have LGBT plus groups, but call them that. Don't call them lesbian if they're mixed. I want lesbian only and other spaces, and lots of us mix in other spaces. This was not a lesbian only session, so there may well be women here who are not lesbian. And we're fine with this. That's what we decided. So. I am hopeful about lesbian community because of all the brilliant lesbians who are trying to maintain it in spite of tremendous odds. So that's an 82-year-old. Reasons to be cheerful too. So, some quotes from younger women. We are lesbians. Nobody gets to define us. 28 years old. A 38-year-old. There is a very strong core of active vocal lesbians who refuse to give in to that pressure, and we're creating lesbian-only spaces again. A 26-year-old, no lesbian should be made to feel ashamed, and she talked about what things that have happened to her, especially by the LGBT community. A 39-year-old said, I think the internet means most younger generations can meet online and find their tribe there. Be interesting to hear from people if they think that's true more widely. And a 32-year-old, a lot of lesbian female-only spaces are run in secret or privately. There are lots of them. I had people write to me, including outside of the survey, telling me that there's no such thing as secret lesbian places because they didn't know about them. My head of department made me write a response to absolute bloody nonsense. So, on a 29-year-old, this is my last quote, it is only us who will fight for ourselves. So, that's the end of my talk.